Hello, this is Randy with Excel for Freelancers, and in this week's training I'm going to show you how you can convert unlimited PDF invoices from any folder into Excel, automatically editable invoices with just a click of a button. It's going to be incredible training. I cannot wait to share it with you, so let's get started. All right, thanks so much for joining me this week. I've got a fantastic training for you today. We're going to zero down on how to convert PDF invoices to actual editable invoices in Excel. We're going to be able to do unlimited PDF invoices. We're going to convert all of them, and we're going to do it in just a click of a button. So that's a tall order. We've got a lot to cover. You'll notice this particular training looks very familiar. We did cover this training estimate, work order, invoice, one click a few weeks ago. I'll alert you and put that link if you want to watch this. So we're not going to be actually creating this invoice in Excel. We're going to be focused on how to convert this PDF invoice automatically into Excel so that it is fully editable. So it's going to be a great training. In fact, unlimited, as many PDFs as you have in your folder, it will convert them all. So we've got so much to cover. I hope you do like these trainings. I bring them each and every week to you absolutely free here on YouTube. In fact, even this application, actually, this PDF to Excel application is free for you. You can use the links down below. All you need to do is just click on them and you can get them either with your email or Facebook Messenger. We're going to get that sent over to you for free. I hope you do like these trainings. There are many ways you can do us a big favor. All you need to do is just click that subscribe button below, and don't forget to hit the notification icon. That will ensure that you get these trainings each and every week and you get alerted to those. Also, comment below. I love to hear your comments, your feedback, and your ideas. That's what makes these trainings available. And don't forget to click the like button. All right, I create these trainings and that will help us out a lot. It'll get that YouTube algorithm to get us a little bit higher in the rankings so that you get alerted when these videos are live. Okay, very good. We've got so much to cover, but I just want to let you know, if you want to take your Excel skills to the next level, there are so many ways to do that. I've got an incredible mentorship program. It's going to take you 132 hours of incredible. It's going to show you how you can define, design, develop, and deploy your own Excel-based applications for passive income. I've got that going on, so I'll include the links down below, and also a brand new Patreon account. If you want to get these trainings, you want to have feedback, and you want to get your own features or your own fixes or your own focus areas on these trainings, I do that each and every week inside Patreon. So a lot going on there. I'll include that link. All right, let's get started on this. This particular week, we don't need to design this. It's already designed for us. We did that in a prior video, and I'll include the link down below. So all we're going to really want to do in this particular training is how do we get this static PDF invoice? How do we get it automatically converted to Excel? And what if we have a folder full of them? How do we do that? So that's what we're going to be taking the focus on. We're going to do all that with just a single macro. So there's not a whole lot in the design state. In fact, there's nothing we need to do in the design because it's already built for us. I've got probably 3 or 4 videos on how to design invoices, so we're not going to focus on that in this training because we've done that before. So if you want to do that, I'll include the link down below. This particular training we did cover as far as how to create. This is basically adding a new estimate, adding a new work order, and then converting that estimate to the work order to the invoice. And then, of course, if you have one, particularly, you just need to load it up here. You can load in work orders, or so it's a really great little product. So what I want to do right now is I want to be able to take specific invoices that have already been created, like these PDF invoices here that I got in the folder, and how to automatically convert them. And that means I want to extract the invoice number, the invoice date, the customer, and all the items along with the total associated, and bring it inside to these data tables so that we can automatically load it up. So for example, I've done this one already. I'm going to delete it and we're going to show it again. But basically this particular one, let's take a look at this invoice number 12. So it started out with this invoice number 12. And then what I did is I simply converted it, which is exactly what I'm going to show you today. And I converted it to an invoice. So when I load that, all the items loaded up. So normally we're printing to PDFs. This time we're going to take PDFs. So that means if your boss says, hey, I've got, here's 100 PDFs of invoices. I want to know what the total is, or how many items did we use, or how many customers, or what was the total customers. Instead of going through a calculator one by one and adding it up, all you need to do is put them all in a folder, click one button and everything is in there. Then you can run reports, you can edit invoices, you can update invoices, and do so much. So it's really great training. Let's take a look at what I have in store for you. Well, first of all, we need a few folders that are going to help us out. So let's take a look at some of the folder structure we have in here. I've got here basically a few folders. I've got some invoices. I'm going to delete these all. Those are just for sample. So this folder structure is going to be in our Dropbox folder. Let me expand that out so you can see it. Basically, what I want to do is I want to have 4 folders, okay? And in those 4 folders, I want to do PDF invoices. This is where the invoices will go to. This is before they get converted, right? They're going to go in here. Once they get converted, I want them to go in an invoice archive. That folder is going to be here. Once they get converted, what I want is our conversion engine is going to automatically create some data that Excel can read. That invoice data is going to go in this folder. Once it is read, it's going to go in this archive folder, this data archive folder. So I've got 4 distinct folders set up in our Dropbox. Dropbox is going to come in handy if you don't have Dropbox. Now's a great time to get it because it is an absolutely free software and one of the best that I've been using for over 10 years. So I hope you go ahead and get that. It's a free file sharing software, and I think you'd be really happy with it. It works great for what we want to use it for today. Okay, so what we want to do is we want to make sure that Excel and VBA knows about these 4 folders, and we can properly place documents, and we can probably pull data from these 4 folders. So we need to map those properly. So to put those in, I have just added them here. The rest of this was part of a prior training. This is what I've added here. That's the only thing I've really added in this, other than a button. Everything else is the same with this application. That's the beauty of it. So we have a PDF invoices. This is where our invoices will go before they are parsed and the data is extracted out from them. We've got the PDF invoice data. This is where the data goes when we want to pull that data, and I'll show you everything about that. Where the invoices is the folder where they invoices, once they get parsed, they go into this archive. And then we also have the data archive. So pretty much those 4 folders is all we need to work with, and those are the 4 folders that I just showed you, okay? So when you get this, you want to make sure to create those 4 folders on your machine, generally in a Dropbox, and I've got those in my Dropbox, okay? So basically, we're going to start with this. We've got 3 invoices, and what we want to do basically is we want to put information inside the database. Once they're inside the database here in Excel, we can then load the invoice. Now, this particular database is really made up of 2 individual tables here. First of all, we have the orders database, and notice here we've got our order ID, we've got an order date, order meaning invoice. Now, we call this one order, not necessarily an invoice, because in this particular application, we have estimates, we have work orders, and we have invoices. Today, we're only going to focus on those invoices. So we have an order type. This is static. We're only focused. We've got the customer. I've got a service tech, a job site, and footer. Those are optional if we want those. I've got a total and the estimate ID, and then a work order ID and the invoice ID. We're just going to focus today on the invoices. That's all we're importing. So just the order ID is the same as the invoice ID here. And so I want to bring this information in. I want to extract that directly from our PDF. Our invoice ID, our invoice date, all the items, our customer that's associated here, our customer here, all the items, the item name, the description, the quantity, the price, and the total. And I want our total. We're not going to worry about subtotal and tax today, but just the total. Okay, so that's all I want to focus on. And I want to extract that, and I want to bring it in. So our main invoice data is going to come here. Well, those individual items as part of that invoice are going to come here. So we noticed here, we've got 3 items. And now again, we have that invoice or order ID, the type, which is an invoice. We have the item name, right? Notice we've got the item name, the description here, just as the way we have it. We've got the quantity. We have the individual item, the item total, and plus I also have the order row. Now the order row, this is that has to do with the order row that we want to place it on side here. So inside our orders, we have order row 10, order row 11, and order row 12. So that's the order in which they're going to go. So that's kind of important. And also what we also have is the database row. This is the actual row of this database right here on the table, and that's going to help us. So we need all those things. So what I want to do is I want to take all that PDF invoice and I want to bring it, I want to extract all of that data from the PDF. I want to bring it into these 2 tables, here and here. Once I have it in those 2 places, I can easily just simply load it. So all I need to do in this particular is just put that order ID in, and it's automatically going to load. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to delete this. Okay, I'm going to clear this out. We don't need this because I want to automatically bring it in. And I'm going to do the same thing for, let's take 14 through 12. We don't need that. I've got invoice in PDF, I've got 12, 13, and 14. So I'm going to clear that. So if I try to load it now, right, if I try to load it, it's going to let us know it's not found. Please enter a correct order because it's no longer in the database. Clicking on add new is going to clear all that out. Again, we can't load it. That doesn't exist here. And that's what we want. We just cleared it out. But what we do want to do is take it from a PDF. And to do that, we're going to use a third-party tool. Something we did use a few weeks ago, the tool worked out pretty well, called PDF.co. PDF.co. Now, in a prior training a few weeks ago, what we did is we took receipts, basically, took a copy of those, and we brought it in. And that was relatively simple because all we needed was pretty much a receipt ID, the total amount of the receipt, the name, and the reference number, and we just brought it in. This time, we're going to add on to that because we need to add in additional information, including the order items, right? So we're adding a level of complexity here, but it's also really, really important because we want to be able to automatically transfer PDF invoices into Excel, and then not only just into Excel, but make them so that they're editable and readable, and we can put date on them. So we really want them in the right place. So that's what we're going to focus on. So how do we do that? How do we take this invoice and do it? Well, again, we're going to use that third-party tool called PDF.co. PDF.co. Super important. And this particular one, I've worked with them a little bit. They're really flexible. This particular document parser we're going to use is in beta. Now, there's a few small issues with it, but I'm working with them directly, and they seem to be really flexible. Their support is really good. In fact, they're so kind. Last time I did the video, they offered us a bunch of free credits. Notice we got credits up here. Your free account will get you 500 credits, but if you use like a non-Gmail, right, you can sign up. It'll give you a lot more credits. So something like a non-free, like a non-free type of email, like a work type of email, they give you a bunch free. And I did discuss with them, and they said, okay, hey, if you put out a video, we'll give your members, and this time we're going to do 12 members get free credits, additional free credits, so 12. So what are we in, about 13 minutes into this video? So if you comment below saying, hey, I want the free credits, and let me know, either you can put your email or you can email me or just let me know so I make sure it's you, I will send them a list of 12 people to get free credits. So they're going to give you a bunch of different credits. Now keep in mind that if you are watching this early on Patreon, all right, you're going to have to wait till the YouTube launch. It's only fair because, of course, on our Patreon, you get these videos to watch 2 days earlier, and you get to see the workbook. So it's a great way on Patreon, but we want to make it fair for everybody. So those of you on Patreon who are watching this, please wait until the YouTube video, about 13 minutes in, before you comment on that down below inside the YouTube, and I can get you your free credits. Okay, so that's up to 12 people. All right, great. So we got this. So what we want to do is once you sign up on PDF.co, it's free. There's pricing, but for our free purposes, it's based on credits, and this should get you a good start on the free credits to try this out. So what we're going to do is we're going to focus on document parser, right? There's a lot of things. They've got a lot of integrations in here. We're going to focus on something called document parser. Okay, I've done a few tests already. So basically, it'll say, what do you want to do? You want a new template, and I've got some existing templates here. So what I want to do is we're going to click on the new template, brand new template. Okay, and there's some instructions on how to use it and helpful. So we can close that for now because I'm going to walk you through. Okay, and so the first thing what we want to do is we want to load or test a PDF or image. So we're going to do a PDF in this case. And I've got this one, 12. Let's focus on this one since we were already working on that one. So I'm going to load that up because that's the one we want. And then what it's going to do is going to put it here. And here's our invoice, just as the PDF as we want it. And all the data is here. So the best thing to do here is you can let PDF.co, let their particular automation run and see if that we can get some type of thing. So the best thing to do is just click on run template, or in fact, just click on this detect objects here. And what that's going to do is going to look for objects and kind of automatically fill it in, at least based on the best. And there's going to be 5 fields. Notice it did find 5 fields. So let's take a look what it found. It found invoice number, and double check to make sure it found the right invoice number. Okay. And we can test this object here. Let's go down here and take a look to see if it found that. And 12, it did find the right invoice number here. And also the date issued, right? So we're going to call that the invoice date, and we can test this one out here and see what date. So click down, make sure it found the right. It did find the right date, but I want it in a different format. So I'm going to do mm/dd/YYYY. Okay. And then again, you can test it. Now let's test it again and make sure that it converts it to the right format. That's the format that I want to use inside. Okay, it did. Very good. So we also have the total. We do want that. I know it kind of goes back and forth, kind of a weird thing there. But let's test this object out. Like, and it kind of expands and decreases, but only when you're hovering. Okay, 849.52. Check that out. That is correct. That's the number we want. We're not going to use subtotal, so let's delete that here. And then click OK. We're not going to use tax, so let's also delete that here and click OK. But what we do want is we want the customer name, right? So we've got invoice number, date issue, and we can, let's just change the name of that. I like something like invoice number, okay? And we can, instead of date issue, I'm going to call this invoice date. Invoice date. Okay, so we give it some, and then we'll just make this, capitalize this just so that's uniform. You can change the labels on these, so it's really nice. Okay, so that we've got that. Let's give it a template name. We'll call this PDF to invoice. PDF to invoice. Very good. So we've got that. And now what I want to do is I want to add two more things. I want to add the customer name. So we're going to add an object here. And I'm going to add a field from a rectangle selection. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to click that. And I'm just going to add this rectangle selection right about here. And then I'm going to drop it down here. And I want to make sure it's long enough so that it covers any type of customer here that might be a long. So I'm going to put that up here. And then what I want to do is I want to test this out. Is it working or not? So I'm going to click on here, test this object. And then we're going to scroll down and make sure that it recognizes that name, Fred Fredders. We cannot have a video without that Fred here. He shows up everywhere. Fred, okay, they did find Fred. Good. So we've got Fred, we've got the invoice number, we've got the invoice date, we got the total, but we do need to add all the data in the grid. So that's what we're going to do now. We're going to click add a table based on a rectangle selection. So it's going to give us that rectangle. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to position that right over all the items. And I'm going to zoom out a little bit here. I'll scroll up a little bit. And then I'm going to encompass the entire table. So I'm going to go all the way up, including the top headers in this case. And I'm going to go all the way down to the bottom. Okay. And that should be good right about there. I want to make sure it doesn't get the subtotal, so I'm not going to include that. And I want to see if this is going to find all of our information. So I'm going to click test object here, just as we did. And then we'll take a look. Okay, let's take a look. It's got items. Now, it did find our top header. So we want to make sure that when we import the data, we're not going to import the first row because that's just our header. So that's fine, not the first row. But let's check. We have 5 columns. That's correct. We have the silicone, we have all the items named, the 3 items, the quantities, we have the price and the total. Well, that looks pretty good. Okay, and what I want to do is I'll give this a name. I'll call this invoice items. Okay, so we have all that. That looks pretty good. Now we've got everything we need properly mapped out. But what I want to do is I want to upload another invoice and make sure that other invoices are, now this particular works great, but if they're all the same types, if you have a different type of invoice, you want to create a template based on that type. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to load or test another. Now it's 12. So let's look at 13 here, and I'm going to click open. And then all we need to do is click run template. And we're going to check that out and make sure that it contains all the data. Okay, so we have our invoice number, we have our invoice date, we have our total. Let's check that. Total is 346.12. We have our customer name. That looks good. Okay, and how about our items? Of course, we have the top row, which we're going to extract, which we're going to leave out, of course, when we bring in the data. We've got all of the rows of data. Okay, the last one I want to do, I want to close this out and do one more. Okay, that was, I believe, 13, and now we're going to do 14. So 14, and then again, run the template again just to make sure that all the data is getting extracted properly. Okay, let's take a look at this. 14, the date, the total, and our invoice items. This invoice only has 2 items. Okay, so it's perfect. It only got those 2 items. Good, I like this the way it is. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to close this out. I'm going to click Save Template and Return. Save Template, we've given it a name. And what that's going to do is give us a list of templates. So I'm going to be focused on this one, PDF to invoice, PDF to invoice. Okay, so that's good. We have our template set. Everything's good. We're confident with the way that it extracts data. Now what we need to do is we need to get some automation. What I want to do is when I put a PDF inside this folder, I want it to automatically upload to this. So this one, I want to send this link to this engine, to the API engine, and I want it to convert it, and then I want the data to come back into Dropbox. Okay, so we do that, of course, with a macro. So the first thing what we want to do is write a macro that's going to check this folder. If there's any PDFs in this folder, I want to upload it inside Dropbox. So we need to write a little bit of code to do just that. It is that code that's we're going to assign to this particular button right here. So we're going to do that inside the developers, and VBA is where we're going to write our macro. And I've already dimensioned some variables to help us move things along. Okay, let's go over some of these variables. We're going to we need the invoice database row, right? I need to know what row to place that. So we're going to place it on the first available row. So that's going to be the invoice database row. So we need that inside a variable. I also need the invoice database column. We're going to be looping through the columns going from 1 all the way to here. Going from 1 all the way here. So I need to loop through the columns adding data. So we need that inside a variable too. We're going to do the same thing for the invoice item row, invoice item column. Again, based on the invoice items, we need the row and which row we're going to be placing in. And we also need to loop through that. So we're going to use a variable to loop through the columns going through 1. Okay, so we have that. I need to know the order row, right? Order row, may not need that order row. I think it's going to use invoice database row. So the PDF count, I want to know how many PDFs we create, and I want to know how many data, how many data sheets that we use. And I also need to know the invoice item, right? We're going to have invoice items inside an array, so we're going to need that. I need to know the PDF invoice folder. What folder is it? And I also need to know the invoice data folder. Remember, we have those folders that we've created. And I want to know the invoice archive and the data archive. So they've got 4 different folders. So we got 4 different variables to cover those particular folders. Also, I need to know the data file path. What is the file path of that entire data file? And a specific file name that we're going to be working with when we work with those. And also the database path as a string. That database path is going to come in handy. Okay. Also, I want to know the invoice ID. We'll put that in as a string. It could be a long variable, but in this case, we'll use a string. Invoice data as a string. And then we need a few arrays that we're going to be working with called the invoice data array. We're going to be using text files. We need to create an array from that and then split that up and then run that. Okay. Also, I need to know the main invoice data as a string, main invoice data. And we'll go through these as we write the code, and also the main invoice data. So basically we need to create invoice data, and also we need table data here and table data array. So we're going to keep that. And also the row data as a string, the row data array, and URL, we're going to be sending something over using a URL and using it as JSON. So we need those as strings, and we need an object HTTP. Okay, so those are our variables. So the first thing we want to do is the most important thing, right? Before we can even get started, we need to make sure that we have proper folders, right? If you get this file, it's probably going to be blank. And if it's not, if I forget to remove these, certainly these file paths are not going to work for you. So we need to make sure in VBA that all these file paths are correct, starting at J28 going all the way through J31. So that's what we're going to do inside the code. So we're going to write some code. The first thing is the PDF folder. Actually, we have a few different ones. So let's do PDF invoice folder is going to be equal to what? Admin.range, and it's going to be that first cell, J28 dot value. So dot value, and I also want to add a backslash onto that. Okay, so and a backslash. Okay, I want to add that backslash onto it. That's going to be the path of that folder, but I need to check that. So if the directory of the PDF invoice folder and then VB directory equals empty, or maybe the variable is empty, or PDF invoice folder equals empty, or double quotes, then let the user know. What are we going to tell them? Message box, please set a correct invoice folder in the admin screen, in the admin, capitalize that, admin screen, and then exit the sub. We can't move on unless we have a correct folder path. Now we're going to do something similar for the remaining 3. So I'm going to copy and paste this down here, here, and here. Okay, so, but their folders are different. First of all, this is going to be 29. This will be 30. And this will be 31. And the variables are going to also be different. So we'll need to update those variables accordingly. Okay, so for this one, right, for the invoice folder, this one, okay, let's put a little note here so we know which one it is. This would be in this case, PDF, if you can't read the invoice, PDF invoice folder check. I want to check that one. Next up, what I want to do is I want to check for, in this case, the invoice data folder. So in this case, we'll call this invoice data folder. We need to update, of course, the variables within that bit of code. So it's this, we're going to copy and paste it here, invoice data folder, and also here as well. So there we go. So those 3 are not there, the whole one there. this one here. Okay, pasting that in there. I want to make sure that the invoice data folder contains a value. So again, we'll call this invoice data folder check. That's where the data goes when it gets converted from a PDF invoice. Okay, so we're checking that. Next up, I want to check the invoice archive, right? Invoice archive. That is where the invoices go once they have already been converted. Invoice archive. And of course, if you're not sure of these variables, you're not sure you got it right, just lowercase. If it changed to uppercase, then you know you've got it right. So I'm going to copy this here, and I'm going to paste it here, and I'm going to paste it directly here. And of course, this one's the invoice archive. So we'll call this invoice archive check. And then lastly, I have the data archive, right? Data, and that's where the data goes when it's completed. So we'll call this data archive. Okay, again, small letters because I'm not sure if I got the variable right, just in case. And it goes data archive. In this case, where the data goes once it has been converted. I'm going to paste it and update those accordingly here and also here. And this we're going to be is our data archive folder check. Okay, so once we know we've got the folders are all correct and the paths are all correct, I want to check that folder. I want to look inside this folder right here, this PDF invoice folder. I want to see, does it contain any PDFs? If it does, then we need to loop through those. So again, let's right here, check for PDFs to convert. So I'm going to set a file name. That's a variable already. It's going to be equal to the directory of, in this case, PDF invoice folder. And then what we're going to do is what else? Any file that basically ends with .pdf. So we can do the asterisk, which is the wildcard, .pdf. Close that. Okay, so we're going to focus. That means any file that I want to set that file name to any file that ends in .pdf. Okay, that's just to check. So now we're going to run a loop. It's going to be called do while loop. And this do while is as long as the length of the file name is greater than 0, because as we loop through those, we're going to be clearing out the name. So this is the start of our loop, start of loop. Okay, because we need to loop through all the files. I want to do this for every single PDF inside that folder. So what are we going to do inside that? Well, the first thing what I want to do is I want to get that full file path, that full path, data file path, right, is going to be equal to that folder, right, and the file name. So the combined together file name, full file path of PDF, right? We need that. That's very important. And now what we want to do is I want to know what is the, excuse me, I said it was database path, but it's really Dropbox. I should change these. Dropbox path, right? What I want to know is what that Dropbox path is. And what does that mean? That means that I only want to know the portion that is after the Dropbox, right? So here's Dropbox, right? So what I want to know is once we put it inside, right? Once we send it to Dropbox to create the link, and I'll show you what that means. Basically, it's going to ask for this. Like it's going to be something like this, and then we'll call it invoice, something like this, .12.pdf, right? So what I'm going to be looking for is just this part right here that starts at Dropbox. So I need to extract that, including that. I want just this part, right? I don't want anything else. So I need to extract this part, and I need to remove this part from the full, here's our full file path. So I need to remove this portion of it, because when we convert it to a link, to do that, inside we're going to use Integromat, and inside that, all they want is this part. So I don't want this, because we know we're using Dropbox, right? So once we upload it, I only need this part. So that's exactly what I want to do, is to do that. And we can do that with a few lines of code. So what I need to do in this case is I need to look for the word Dropbox and remove everything to the left of that, including the characters that go with that. So including those 8 characters or 7 characters or whatever they are, I want that here. So to do that, we can just write a little bit of code, that Dropbox path. Okay, so let's write that in right now. So the Dropbox path is equal to, we're using the replace command. And I also want the right. I want to know the right of that. We're going to use the right command. And I want that full data file path. And we're going to use the length. I need to know the length of that data file path. Okay, in this case, we're going to say it's going to subtract, right? We're minusing, right? I need to extract, I need to remove certain amount of it. So what part are we removing? Well, we're removing the part that says Dropbox, right? So how do we get that? Well, we could do minus, and we're going to look for that prop in string. And then what are we looking for? Data file path, right? We're going to look for in string. And what are we looking for? I'm looking for Dropbox. Dropbox. That's the word I'm looking for inside that path. And what I want to do is I want to subtract 6 from that. So how do I do that? Well, we can do -6. So that's going to be this first 6 part. But what else do I want to do? I also want to replace, right? I also want to look for all the backslashes, and I want to replace them with forward slashes. And I'll show you why in coming up in Integround. But basically, it won't recognize the backslashes, but it will recognize the forward slashes. So what we're going to do is use the replace command. And I'm going to look for those backslashes, and I'm going to replace them with forward slashes, just like that, okay? And so that's it. That's all we have to do. Again, let's go over that. We're replacing. This part of the replace covers this. Basically, all we're replacing is the backslashes in that file path with forward slashes, because that's going to come in handy. Okay, we're going to get the right. I want to extract this, the data file path. I only want the right portion, and I'm going to look for Dropbox, and I'm going to subtract 6 because I don't want to include the words Dropbox or the path. So I'm extracting 6 and only what I want. And we'll put a little message box here to make sure we have the right message box db path. Okay, so that's it. Now let's just run that so far and see, make sure we have the right path exactly the way we want it. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to, inside our folder here, I'm going to add one single PDF here, copy that here, and put it inside here. And I'm going to paste that in there. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to run the code up until now and just run it here. So that's all I want to do. And this is what our result is. Would be / PDF to Excel, right? PDF invoices, invoice. That's exactly what I want, right? I don't want anything else. So that's exactly, we're good to go on that. Okay, we got to delete that. Let's break that error. Since we're in a loop, we don't need that. All right, we're in a loop, but that's okay. We don't need that right now. Okay, but basically we're not going to loop it out once we remove, we're clearing that file name, right? We're going to do that at the end of that. We'll get to that in a moment. Okay, but everything's right so far. We don't need the message box. Let us continue. So now that we have that, what I want to do is I want to send that, and I want to send that information to Integromat. We're going to get into that in just a moment, but let's build out the ability to send it to them. So the best way to do is we're going to do this set an object HTTP, right, is going to equal, we're going to create an object. And I want to send it using, of course, HTTP. So to do that, we're going to create an object. And what type of object are we going to create? Well, it's going to be an MS XML2 server XML HTTP. So that's basically, we're going to set that object. Basically, it's going to allow us to send that information via a webhook. Create object MS XML2 server XML HTTP. Okay, so now what I want to do is we need to know what we're going to send to them. Well, basically, I want to send that URL, right? I want to send that message by that information. But we can do that with a URL. So we're going to use URL is going to be equal to, and we're going to send a webhook. We don't have that webhook just yet. We're going to put that in right in a moment, right? And then what I want to do is after that webhook, I want to put a question mark. And then what I want to do is I want to put in that label. What is that label? We'll call it PDF link. That's any label we want to. A equals what? It's going to equal and whatever that Dropbox path, because that's very specific for Dropbox. So once we have that, right, we've got that Dropbox path. That is, we'll call that the Dropbox link includes Dropbox path. So, and of course, this part, remember, right before this question mark, we'll be adding that in just a moment. Okay, so, but I want to add a little bit more in before we get to that part. So what are we going to do? Well, now what we want to do is we need to send that information. So we're going to use, in this case, object HTTP. Again, we're focused on that, dot open. We're going to use open in this case. And I want to know what we're going to be open. We're going to use the get. We can use get post in this case, but get dot URL false. Okay, so we need false. Next up, what I want to do is I want to set the requested header. What is that header? Well, it's going to be content type application JSON. So how do we do that? Again, we can copy this because we're going to be using it a few times. Object HTTP. In this case, we're going to set the request header, and that request header is going to be in this. It's going to be content. We're sending it JSON type, right? Content type. That's the label. And what is it type? Is it going to be application /JSON, okay? So that's our header type, header. And next up, once we have that header, we want to send that information. So that's going to be basically dot send, and we're going to send it in the JSON format, okay? We're sending that send information. Send link detail. Okay, so we're sending that over. Basically, we're going to send it to Integromat. We're going to send it, actually, we're going to send it to Dropbox, and then Dropbox is going to create a link for us. And it's that link that we're going to use, like a download link. And I'll explain that for you in just a moment. Okay, so once we have that, what we want to do is, before we end the loop, we want to clear out the name. File name, this is how we get rid of the loop. File name equals directory, right? And then just empty. This clears. What this does is it clears out current file name, so it can loop through other files, right? If we have just file to clear it out. What I want to do after this is, actually, we'll stop at this point right here, but what we're going to be basically doing is we're going to use a wait now, but this is okay for now with the rest. We do need to get that link. Let's get that link so we can actually send this information. So are we going to do that? We're going to do that with Integromat, another great application. So let's get into that, and it's called Integromat. Now, we've been over this a few times if you've watched my videos. If not, sign up for the free Integromat. I'll include a link down below, and it allows you up to about 1,000 operations per month. So it's really cool as far as a free one, and of course you can pay if you want additional or you're using it for business purposes. And what we're going to do is we're going to create a scenario. So I'm going to click create a new scenario. Once you get logged in, you'll call it create scenario. And this scenario is going to use about 3 different components. And you can put the common components down here. So we can do that. So if we do searching, the first thing I want to use is a webhook. You can also search here and click here. But let's search here so we can easily access. And so webhook is the first one we're going to be using. And that's right down here, webhook. It is that webhook that we need. And we're also going to be using pdf.co. PDF, right? That's an important one, .co. And let's type that in here. The search, kind of a little bit quirky, huh? PDF. There we go. .co. That's the one I want. PDF.co. And of course, we're using Dropbox too. So let's type that in. Dropbox. These are the common ones that we're going to be using. Notice it doesn't search unless I go out and back in. Notice that? Dropbox. Okay, Dropbox, if I can spell it. Okay, there we go. So now we have our most frequent ones here, and these are our favorites that we can do. So the first thing what I want to do is I want to create a webhook. Notice your favorites will come here. And that webhook is going to be called a custom webhook. This is what we want to do. So we're going to click add, and we'll call this, let's call this PDF to invoice. And we don't have any IP restrictions, so we'll click save. And what that's going to do is going to create this webhook. That is what we need to copy. So we're going to click copy on that one. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to go into our code, and I'm going to paste that right before this question mark here. Okay. I'm saving our work as we've done so far. And now we're ready to run it. So basically what I want to do is when I run this code, I want this thing to go to green, and I want to make sure that it's been received. I want that to send that webhook. So that's what we're going to do right now. We're going to run this code here, and let's fix this part here. Definitely not a header unless you're in cows or something, probably a header. And continuing on. All right. And of course, we've got lots of things. Not setting it, sending it. Okay, only wrote a little bit of code, but make enough errors. Okay, so that's, of course, we're sending it, not sending it. And then continuing on. Okay, so we fixed those up. Now what we want to do is we're going to check that. Now it's gone to green. It's successfully determined that. That's exactly what I want to happen, right? I want to make sure it's recognized. I'm clicking OK. All right, so now let's continue a little bit on with the code. And then what we're going to do is we're going to be able to send that. So to do that, we only have a little bit more in this portion of the code. So what else do we want to do? Well, the first thing what I want to do is I want to give it some time. Now in my tests, I know that this next portion, when we send it to Dropbox and then we send it to PDF, it takes about 30 seconds, right? And I want a single macro that does everything. This macro is going to do everything, and that means we need to wait for that conversion to happen. We need to wait to send it to the API for pdf.co. We need to let it convert it, and then we need to get the information back into Dropbox. All that's going to take about 25 seconds. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put a wait now, and I want to wait that amount of time. So to do that, first thing what I want to do is do application wait. So application dot wait. Okay, when do we want to wait? Well, we're going to wait now plus maybe about 30 seconds. So we'll do plus time value, and then of course we don't want any hours, and I don't want any minutes, and I want about 30 seconds. So we're going to add 30 seconds onto that. Okay, so let's put a comment, wait 30 seconds for conversion. So now that we've waited conversion, now what do I want to do? Well, basically what I want to do is I want to take this file path, that basic invoice, right? And I want to put it in, now that it's converted, we've uploaded it, so we know it's in here. I want to take it and I want to move it basically to this invoice archive. I want to move it here. We've already used it. Now keep in mind that what I want to do is this, to send to Dropbox. I want to basically right click this, and I want to create a Dropbox link. So copy Dropbox link. That's what we're going to do with the API, because it is that link, right? Let's take a look at what that link would be. If we see link's going to look something like this, except it's going to be a 1 at the end of it. 1 means the download. So what we're going to do through APIs, I want to send this link to pdf.co, because this link is going to allow them to take that PDF and convert it, right? But we need to tell it to do that. So we're going to have Dropbox automatically create this download link for us so that pdf.co can automatically upload that and then convert it. So that's exactly what we're going to be doing. But what I want to do is once that's done, we can then move that invoice from the invoice folder into the archive. So let's do that. But if that invoice is already inside the archive, it could create an error, right? If it's already inside this here, it could create an error. So I want to, if it's found there, I want to delete it with the same name. Okay, so we can do that with this, with an if statement. If the directory of the invoice archive, let's do that, archive, and then right, we need to do that, and the directory, right, I just want the name, data file path, right, that's just going to extract the name, right, .vb directory. I'm going to check if it does not equal empty, does not equal empty, then what do we want to do? Then basically I want to kill it. So what are we going to kill? Pasting that in there, killing that. And what that's going to do is ensure that it is not, if exists, then delete. Very good. So now we've covered that. Now continuing on, now that we can know it's there, now we actually have to move it there. So how are we going to do that? Well, the first thing what I want to do is I'm going to use the save as, and that's basically going to move it there. And so we can use, in fact, this case, what we'll use file copy. What we'll do, we'll first copy it and then we'll delete it. File copy. It's going to come from data file path. That's our source. And what's our destination? Our destination is this, invoice archive and path, right? And basically you're going to copy file to archive folder, to the archive. Once we've copied it over, then we can delete it, right? Then we can kill, right? Delete. So it's going to basically copy data file path. Okay, very good. And also what I want to do is I want to run a count. I want to know how many PDFs that I'm converting. To do that, we could just do, we've got a variable, long variable called PDF count. So we're going to PDF count equals PDF count plus 1. Count PDFs converted. So now, and that's the end of our loop. So that's all we need to do. Okay, so I'm going to, of course, save our work, right? And now we have, make sure that we have a PDF in that folder, right? Inside our folder here, PDF invoices here. Okay, good. So now we have that, but let's continue with Incubat. So now we've finished that portion of the macro. So we get this webhook, and what do we want to do with it? I want to send it to Dropbox. And what's Dropbox going to do? Dropbox is actually going to create or update a shared link. That's what I want to do, just like that link that I showed you. So where are they going to get that folder from? What do we want to select? Okay, once you add your folder, I've already added my Dropbox, but you'll have to connect your Dropbox using add, but I've already done that. So what do I want to do? Do I want to select a specific file, or do I want to map it? Well, ours is going to be mapped, and it's coming from this webhook. And what is that file path? Now now look at this here. You see this path right here? This is what I'm talking about. This is why we had to replace our backslashes with forward slashes. This is why we had to remove that Dropbox, because all that it's looking for is the backslashes plus the file path plus the name, and that's using forward slashes, not backslashes. So that's why we have it. So we know we've got that. It's coming from that label. Here's the label that we gave it, PDF link. Notice that that's exactly the same label that we gave it right here, PDF link, right? So we know here's the label, the field label here, and here's the value. So it's the value we're sending it over. So again, it is this value that we're going to place directly inside here. So PDF link there. And the rest is public link, link's expiration date. We don't need that, the access level, and click OK. Now that we have that, what else do we want to do? So it's going to create that link. And now what I want to do is I want to take that link that it just created, and I want to send it to pdf.co. And once you connect your pdf.co, what do we want to do? Well, what I really want to do is I want to parse a document, right? We've already created it, but we created it in a template, and I want to parse a document. So I'm going to click parse document. And so what do I want to do? In this case, I want to import a file from a link. We have a URL. It's coming from Dropbox. So we're not going to upload. We're going to import from URL. And what is that URL? That URL is created by that Dropbox, and it's going to be called that download link, right? Download URL right here. That's the one we want. So we're going to map that. I'm going to put that download here. I only want, now we've got a document. So here's what's the link of the URL. This is the URL that we created. That's why Dropbox was so important in this case, because it actually created it for us. Now we have to know what document parser template ID. We just created a template here called PDF to invoice. Remember, we created that one. And notice it's got an ID number, 1921. That's the ID that we need to use, 1921. So I'm going to put that ID right in here, 1921. Okay, our output file is going to be JSON, right? We remember it needs a number of seconds, so we're going to put about 15 seconds, but really it takes about 20, 22, 23. Okay, profiles, we don't need to worry about anything with that, and the output is going to be JSON. Cool, so let's click OK, and that's pretty good so far. So saving our work here, saving here, and what we're going to do is we're going to just auto align it. So that's going to be a good start. Basically, what we're going to do is we're going to upload a link, we're going to convert it to a public link, and we're going to send it to PDF to go, and then we're going to check it out. Let's take a look. So now what we're doing is we've saved it. Of course, we can give it a name here if we want to give it a name. We'll just call this convert PDF to invoice. Good. So now what I want to do is I'm going to click run once. And what it's going to do is going to listen for it. So now, as long as I have that PDF in this folder here, which I do, PDF invoice, let's put it in there, copy that, and then put it inside here. I'm going to put that one in here, the PDF folder. Now what I want to do is I'm going to minimize that, and I'm going to go and I'm going to run this macro right here. Okay, if there's any issues, and now what we're going to do is minimize that here and take a look inside here, and it ran already. It ran here, and now it's currently running here. Remember, it takes about 15 to 20 seconds or something, so it's running here, and we're going to check all the values of that run once it's complete, and I'm going to go step by step with you to see exactly what it found and what it had. So it's running that, and everything looks good. No errors, no issues. Okay, we can close that out. So again, let's take a look inside here. Our output of our webhook is this PDF. This is what we said. Here's the label, and here's the link that we sent it. It's sent to Dropbox. And now what did Dropbox get? Dropbox got that link. And what did it do with that link? It created a download link. And what is that link file download? It is located right here, this download URL. That's what it created. Its job was just to create that download URL. Here inside PDF, what did it do? Let's take a look inside here. And it got that import options here. Here's the import. It got that import download, and it came from a URL. Great. And what was its output? What did it get? Okay, let's take a look inside here. The output here, the name is Invoice 12 base. And what is the body? Okay, let's take a look here. We've got outlook time, outlook value, objects value. Okay, so again, body, keep that in mind. Objects value, not objects. Objects is generally time for it, but objects value, invoice number 12. Invoice, notice these are the labels that we created inside the template, the 12. Invoice date, we have the total, and we have, we didn't add a customer name to this, but we'll get to that. Rectangle 12, let's do that right now. That should be important. I'm going to edit that. That should be customer name. We didn't give a name to that, but that's okay. Rectangle 12 here, let's give that a customer name. We should want to give that customer name. Okay. Good. So we've done that, saving and returning. All right. So that's fine. So, but the values there, that's the important thing. And so what else do we have? Now we got to focus on the rows. Let's take a look at this. The row, the first row, or row 0, items, description, quantity. Well, we know that, but we don't need that, but that's okay. We're not going to import row 0, right? We are going to start out with row 1. Let's take a look at row 1. Column 1, bath and vanity, a cabinet, the quantity. The column 4 is, of course, the price, and then the total. Same with columns. So all of that data got brought in. All of it is here. Perfect. So now what I want to do, and here we have invoice, but this is all we need, right? So all the data came in. Now our job is to take this and put it into a text file and bring that text file back, and then Excel can read that. So how are we going to do that? Well, what I want to do is I want to create a text file. So I'm going to add to this, right? And what I want to do is I want to go into Dropbox. And in this case, what I want to do is I want to create or overwrite a text file. Create or overwrite a text file. So I'm going to add that here. And so what I want to do is I want to overwrite this. So overwrite, okay? And I'm going to use a map. Are we selecting a file or are we going to map a file? We can select a file, right? And then sometimes what we'll do is we want to know where we want to put it. So I'm going to put it basically inside PDF to Excel. And then I want to put it inside. Where do I want to put it? I want to put it inside the invoice data folder. That's where I want to put it. So we have that, so that's where it's going to go. But what is the file name? But it's not going to allow us to do that. So PDF to Excel, invoice data is where we want to send it. But instead, let's map a file so we can assign a distinct name for it. Again, so we're going to do something like, and if you're not sure, all you need to do is just make sure that we're putting it directly inside here. We want it to come into invoice data. So this is where I want it to go, right here. So pasting that exactly where you want it to go. So in this case, we're using, of course, this time backslashes here, right? Forward slashes here. Invoice data. I want to give it a unique name, right? A distinct name. And I want to make sure it's a TXT file. So we've got template name. We can do this PDF to invoice, but I don't want the template name. I want to use something unique, right? So we'll use the file name. In this case, we can use .pdf as long as we end it with .txt. It's fine. We've got a few other names here. So for example, if we want to do a name here, we can do objects value, but let's do this. Let's use the file name PDF, but I want to make sure it ends in .txt because it's a .txt file that we are creating. And also what I want to do in this case, what is the source file? The source file. I want to map it. I want to put those file contents in. What are those file contents? Well, it's going to be based directly on our data tables, right? So the first thing is based on our order database. So what I want inside this, I want to put that order ID. Then I want to put the order date. And then I want to put the type. In this case, it's always going to be invoice, so it's fixed. Fixed in this case. So let's do that. Let's add that in right now. First thing is I want to get that invoice ID, which is this invoice number here. I'm going to place that directly in here. Now I need to separate that with the next field. And then you need to use a delimiter, and we're going to use the asterisk as a delimiter. The next step, of course, we want to put that date, that invoice date. I'm going to use another delimiter, and then what I want to do is always going to be invoice, right? This particular type. So I'm just going to type in invoice. And then what I want to do is type another asterisk so I can separate it. And let's take a look inside our database in the order. We have the customer name, so we want to do the customer. We didn't assign a service tech, a job site, or a footer, so we want to create 3 different blanks. Customer is going to come next, okay? So in this case, let's do this. Let's add that in here. So in this case, our customer table, in this case, we also have, how many times did I say in this case? Where is it going to be? It's coming directly from here, rectangle 3. We've renamed it. So what I want to do is probably going to run that again. It may not recognize it now because we have a different name on that. So let's click OK, right? And what I want to do is I'm just going to right click here and I'm going to unlink this and I want to run it one more time and I want to get that updated field. So if you miss a field like we did, I want to update it so that we can get the right field. So I'm going to click run once here. I'm going to have it convert one more time. So again, our empty is blank. That's fine. I'm just going to copy anything here. I'm going to place it directly inside our PDF invoices here and paste that in here. Okay, now we're ready to run our code here. Let's just run our code one more time. Make sure we get that updated label. Coming back in here, okay, we're going to update that. Let's take a look. Okay, and now we see that updated one going, and we'll check to make sure that that updated field name gets converted. Instead of label 3, we want it to set it to customers. So we'll let this finish, and then we'll reconnect it again to make sure that that updated label got set in. Once it finishes. All right, great. Now that it's finished, we're going to take a look at this. That, of course, we want to look at the output, right? We want to make sure the body here, template objects value here. And now we have customer name. That's what I wanted to put in there. Now we can reconnect it, right? I didn't want it happening. I want to reconnect it there. Go back in here, right? Go back in here. And now what I want to do is, there we go. Now we've got inside our objects value, we're looking for customer name, right? I want to relabel that, so I want to make sure that that label. Okay, so after our customer name here inside our orders database, we have service tech, job site, and footer. Now, we didn't add these fields in, which we easily could, but you get the point. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to create some blanks. So let's do that inside there. So first the asterisk separate, then I need one asterisk to separate, another one, and another one. Okay, so that's going to create 3 individual spaces. That's what I want. So it's going to skip those. After that, what do we want? Well, of course, we need the total. So let's put in the total. We have that already here inside our objects variable. We have our total. So I'm going to put in total. Then what happens after that? Then I'm going to have estimate ID and work order. We can skip those 2, and I want to put the invoice ID one more time. So again, 2 blanks and then the invoice ID. into here. So again, one blank here and another blank here. That's two blanks. Then again, I want one more time that invoice number here. Okay, let's go over that. Again, we have our invoice number, then we're going to put in an asterisk, then we have our invoice date, then we have a static invoice, right? We want to put in the invoice, then we have the customer name, then we have three blanks, we've got the total, we've got two blanks, and then we've got the invoice number. That's perfect, okay? That covers all the header information, but what about our invoice table? We still need to do that. Now I need to differentiate, right, between our table items and our header items, right? So I need to have some kind of a different delimiter in this case. Okay, so why don't we put something very unique? Let's do backslash. It could be anything as long as it's not a common, right? We'll do TI and then another backslash, okay? So that means after this point is going to be all of our table information. Okay? So basically our table information is going to be all the listed information. So where's that located? Of course, our first one, we don't want to include the item description. These are our headers. We don't want to include that. But we do want to start with our rows. So let's go ahead and put that in right now. I'm going to put in column number 1. Now keep in mind there might be a way to aggregate all of this into easier, but that's going to take a little bit more time in an array. But if you guys experts can figure out a quick way, I'm sure there is. Maybe the next time we update these, we'll figure out a quick way where we can automatically update all of these rows. We're going to do it the manual way a little bit. It's just a few more minutes. So basically I want that first column row, that description, column 1. Then I want to separate that by an asterisk. Then I want that second one separating by an asterisk. The third one, that's the quantity, separating by an asterisk. Then I want the fourth one, separating by an asterisk. And then the fifth one, separating by an asterisk. Okay, again, so row 1, column 2, row 1, column 3, row 1, column 4, and then row 1, column 5. We've got them all. But now again, I need to separate. I need something distinct that's going to show we're at a different row, right? We're starting a brand new row. So why don't we use something similar like backslash or forward slash, in this case, R and then R. That's perfect. That'll differentiate when we start a brand new row. So now all we need to do is just to do the second row. Now we're on row 2. Again, column 1, relatively easy, separated by an asterisk. Column 2, asterisk. Column 3, asterisk. Column 4, asterisk. And then column 5, and then asterisk. Okay, perfect. I like that. Again, brand new row, R. So all you need to do is just duplicate this for each of the rows, and you're good to go. Okay, the last one we'll do, and that's going to be our row 3. So again, all we need to do is, again, do our clear column 1, asterisk, column 2, asterisk, and we're going to double check this, 3, asterisk, 4 asterisks, and the last one 5 asterisks. And the last one's 5. We don't need an ending asterisk. Okay, so let's just take a quick look at our data. So we've got here we'll go row, column 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 of our first row. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 of our second row, separated by that row. I think we don't need this last asterisk, right? So we don't need to. I'll make sure that we just need the row like this one. Don't need the last asterisk, just this to separate the rows. Then we only have an asterisk again. 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. Perfect. I like that way. Click OK. That's going to save it. Okay. Again, saving your work here. Okay. So now that we have that, we've got that all brought in. It's going to be brought into this invoice data file. We're going to map that file. We're going to bring it all the way in. Okay, let's take a look. Why don't we run this and make sure that that text file and see what it looks like and make sure it ends up in there. So I'm going to click run once here. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to, again, transfer an invoice into that. I think I'm going to refresh that. That's going to be gone. So I'm going to copy this one here. I'm going to paste it directly into our PDF invoices here, into that folder where it's going to be looking. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to run that macro up until that point. Okay, so I'm going to run that macro here. And then we're going to take a look inside that and make sure that that macro is recognized. Okay, and there it is. All right, and so as it's moving through, taking about 20 or so seconds, it's going to create that, and then it's going to transfer to Dropbox. Okay, let's take a look inside here, and then we'll take a look inside Dropbox. Again, we have our input, all the information, our output. Let's take a look at our output here. That looks good. PDF invoice, text files got created. Let's take a look inside our PDF and our invoice data file here. This is what just got created. So let's take a look inside that file and see to make sure that we have everything we want. Again, we have our invoice number, we have our date, our invoice, our static term, our customer. We have 1, 2, 3 blanks. We have our total. We have 2 blanks, 1, 2, our total. Then again, we have a duplicate of that invoice number. We have our table. Our table is going to start here. Our first information here. We've got a ceramic bathroom sink here. Perfect. I think we're missing an asterisk right here. We are missing an asterisk there. Okay, sink. quantity here. Remember, we have the item description. So it looks like we missed an asterisk. Let's double check on that. I see we did miss an asterisk on the first one. So all we do need to do is check our right after our first one to see that we missed an asterisk. Column 1 here. Oh, no, it's right here. Here it is. Okay, so ceramic bathroom sink, we got our asterisk and everything looks good. Again, total. And then we have our next row, right? Our applies. Here's our next row. Then we have that, our asterisk, our information, our quantity here, our amount, and our total, and our last row. So everything looks really good. Now all I need to do is have Excel read this through some DBA, parse it properly, and place it in the right place. So that's what we're going to do right now. So we're going to continue on. So let's continue with our macro and focus on the last portion of our macro so that we can do that. Again, we're going to start a brand new loop. This time we're going to check for text files in that specific folder. So again, check for text files to import invoice data. We're going to do that with a new loop. Again, this time again, file name equals, in this case, directory of what? Our invoice data folder, different folder here. And again, we're looking for different types of files. What are we looking for? I'm looking for text files this time and .txt files. That's what I want to look for. We're going to also run another do while loop. Do, because I want to do it for all the data files in there. Do while the length of the file name, same as we did, is greater than 0. Okay, and again, that's again start of the loop, start loop. Okay, so now that we've got the start loop, do while file name is greater than 0. Length of the double parentheses here. Length, we don't need the one at the beginning of length. Okay, get rid of that. Okay, so now we have that. So do while. So what are we going to do? The first thing we want to do is, of course, assign that path name. Just like we did before, I want to assign a full file name to that path. So what is that? It's going to be, in this case, data file path is equal to, again, our folder, invoice data folder, and also I want the directory of that name. So what is that file name? It's going to be that file name that we had. So that's going to complete the complete file path of the text file. Okay, so we've got that file path. Now what I want to do is I want to open that. Open it. Of course, it happens very quickly. You don't see it. It's behind the scenes. That's why I love working with text. Sure, we could bring this in an invoice, in another Excel file, I mean, but that would take longer. So I like using these much easier to work with text files, at least much faster. You can do hundreds in seconds. That's why we work with text files. Data file path. We're going to open that file path for input as number 1. Okay, so that's going to open that text file. And then line input, what I want to do is number 1, I want to assign that a variable. So number 1 is going to be equal to the invoice data. That is going to be our string variable called invoice data. So all of that data is going to go in a single string. Everything you saw in that file is going to go into that single string. Once we have that, what I want to do is simply close it. Close number 1. Okay, so that's going to close the file. So all we do is open it. We put everything, that entire string, inside this invoice string. Create string, let's call it string of data. So now we've got that. So once we have it, we can then move on. I want to add that, ready to add the invoice data. So the first thing what we're going to do is we're going to take that and we're going to parse it, right? I need to separate that. Let's take another look inside this thing. And so what I want to do is I want to separate it. They're going to start separated into 2 portions. The first portion is going to be based on this file here, TI, okay? So wherever I find this TI, I'm going to take this first portion here, I'm going to separate that into a string. Everything else is going to be into another string. This is for the table. This is for the main invoice data. Okay, so different. So I want to separate that to do that. And we're going to use this unique text to do that right there. So we're going to split that. And that's all we need to do inside here. So that's what we're going to do first inside VBA. So to do that, we're just going to use the split. So I'm going to use, this case, going to set the table data, in this case called invoice data array, right? That array here is going to be equal to, again, I want to run that split. What's that split going to be? I want to split that into 2. I want to split that into 2. Okay, so we're splitting it. What are we splitting? The invoice data, what we just got. And what are we going to split it by? That TI, that /TI/. That's what we're going to split. Split string based on main invoice data and table data. So we're going to put it into 2 different sections. Okay, then we can work with each individual one. So what I want to do is that, what about that first one? That first one, using that array, is going to be called the main invoice data. I have that in a string already. equal to invoice data array. That array, that's the first value, the first portion of it. Remember, there's two portions. The first portion always in an array always gets that 0 assignment. That's called our main invoice data, right? There's two parts. The first one is 0 inside array, and the second part is 1, main invoice data. And what about the second part? Let's call this table data. That's good enough. Equals, again, simply the second part here, just this second part here. So how do we do that? Is simply this invoice data and then 1, right? It's changed this to 1. This is our table data. So let's get rid of that. This is our table data called table data. Okay, now we've separated into two different strings. We can work with them individually. So to do that with the main invoice data, I want to split this even farther, right? I want to take this. Let's put it up here. I want to take this. Now that we have this in a string all the way from here, all this in a string, I want to split this even further. I'm going to split this based on the asterisk. So we're going to use the split, and our asterisk is our delimiter. So to do that, we do that here. We're going to assign it just one more label here, and that's going to be called the main invoice data, and it's going to be an array, is going to be equal to split. What are we splitting? We're splitting that main invoice data. And what are we splitting it by? We're splitting it by that delimiter. We created that asterisk there. There we go, not the 8. That asterisk, okay, we're going to call this split main invoice data. Okay, and also remember, we also have the table data. We have table data array. I want to create another one based on the table data. I want to split that, in this case 3, but I'm going to use another split. Remember, now that we have the rest of it, right? So now what we have is all of this. I'm going to split this one more time, but I'm going to split it based on the number of rows. So I'm going to use this R here to split it. In this case, it's going to be 1, 2, and then we have another one here. So I'm going to split it into 3 sections using a split and using a table. It's going to be equal to split. What are we splitting here? In this case, table data. And then we're going to use that R. That's going to split it based on the rows. Split table data based on rows. Okay, there was a lot of splitting and some arrays, so let's just go over that again. I'm going to extract the entire string, right? This entire string, everything you see here, into one variable. Once we have that, we're going to then separate the main invoice data from the table invoice data into 2 different sections. Again, that is this here, based on this TI. We're going to separate the first section and the second section, all based in. So then we have 2 sections. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to do a third split. I'm going to take this table and I'm going to split it based on the number of rows. So going to be row 1 here, and this is going to be row 2 here, and then we're going to have row 3 here. So we're going to, and then that's called the table data array, splitting it based on the rows. Once we have all that, I'm ready to add inside our main invoice data. So add in main invoice data. Okay, to do that, we just need to know where to add it. So where are we going to add it? Here it's going to be in the orders database. So I'm going to need to find the first available row inside our order list and place it. In this case, it's going to be row 15. So to do that, we need to get a variable. So we can say the invoice database row is going to be equal to the orders database, that's the sheet name, range A, and then 9999999 dot end XL up dot row. Okay, so that's going to simply dot row and then +1. We want the first available row, first available row. Okay, so once we have that first available row, then all we need to do is just run a loop. Okay, but I'd like to put that invoice ID inside a variable. We're going to be using that invoice ID a few times, so I'm going to call this invoice ID is going to be equal to, now how do we can extract that invoice ID? That invoice ID is right here. It's the first value inside our array. So that first value is going to be 0 inside an array, the number 0, item number 0. So we can pull that. So it's going to be the main invoice data array. In this case, 0. It's going to be set that invoice, set invoice number into variable. So once we have that in a variable, now we're ready to do that. So it's very, very easy. All I need to do is run a loop now. I'm going to run a loop from column number 1 all the way to the last column. What is that last column? That last column is 11. So I'm going to do 1 to 11. And I've got the invoice database column. That is going to be our variable. So we could do for invoice database column is equal to 1 to 11. And then close our loop. Next, invoice database column. So with that, we're just going to place that data. So we're going to place it where? Inside our orders database dot cells. We're using cells because both the column and the row are variable. the invoice database row, and then the column invoice database column dot value is equal to what? It's equal to basically we're going to use the variable inside that array. So we can do that very, very easily. And now remember, right, our arrays start at 0, but our columns start in 1. So what is our array? It's main invoice data, and then that array here is basically going to be our invoice database column -1. Why -1? Because when we start on 1, right, our invoice database column starts on 1. We need to, the value here is actually 0. The first one's 0, and then it goes up. So we need to subtract 1. It's going to add main invoice data to table. That's it. Just one row will add all those 11, right? In the ones that just have asterisks, of course, they're going to be skipped, right? Remember, we have some with just asterisks like here, here, and here. They're just going to be skipped because we have those asterisks there. Okay, so that's going to add all the data. Good. That's done for the data. All we need to do is add in our table data now. So that covers it. So add in table data. So to do that, now we have it. First of all, I need to know what row. Again, just like we did here, I'm going to copy this here, and I want to update this. So in this case, we're going to say in this case, invoice item row is going to be equal to, not the orders, right? This is a different database, right? We're focused on here it's going to be called our order item database, order item database. So let's do that. Update that order items database. And to make sure you got the name right, you just add a dot here and make sure the IntelliSense comes up, and it does. Okay, good. So that's our first available row. We only need one equals there. Okay, so that is our first available row inside our items database. Once we know what row we're going to be adding, at least the first row, right? What we want to do is we want to get, again, that order row. What is the order row? I want to set an initial order row. Why is that important, right? If we look in here, we keep track of order rows. I need to know what row. And that means what row it's going to be placed on. Our initial row is always going to be 10, and we're going to go 11, 12, right? So in this case, our first row for this particular format is going to be 10. So let's set that initial row to 10. So we can do that inside our order row is going to equal to 10. Set initial order row, and then all we need to do for every item is increment it 1. Okay, so now what we're going to do is for a loop invoice item row is going to be equal to, but now I need to know how many rows. How many rows are we going to be, right? We need to loop for every rows. Well, this one right here, split table based on rows. We know this particular array, right, is going to tell us exactly how many. So I need to know the lower bound and the upper bound of that array. That's going to tell us exactly how many we're going to do. So we can do that. So we're going to split up, is going to be the L bound, the lower bounds of what? Of our table data array. So that's going to be the bottom bounds to the upper bound, U bound, which is the upper bound of that table data array. So that's it. Next invoice item row. Okay, so basically what that's going to create a loop for every row, right? In our first experience it had, right, we split this in this case 2 times, so we have 3 different rows. So we have 3 different rows. So the lower plus the upper, this would start at 0 to 2, creating a 3. So it's going to go 0, 1, 2. Creating 3 different loops here. So for each loop, what are we going to do? Well, let's look back on our database and take a loop and see what we need to add. Well, we have here, let's make this fixed so we can see it. I'm going to, of course, make it view, freeze the panes, and then as we scroll, so we can easily see the column headers. Okay, so we have here, we know the invoice ID, right? In this case, order ID or invoice ID. This is going to be fixed, but we're really adding only this information, right? So I'm going to start with columns A and B and add that information. Then I'm going to add this information. Then I'm going to add this, okay? So let's do that. Let's add A and B first, right? Before we get into the data, right? So how do we do that? So in this case, we're going to do orders, items, database, order item, not orders, order items, database, dot range, A, and what? Our invoice item row dot value. What is it going to be? Then of course that's going to be our first invoice ID, which is invoice ID. We've already placed that in a variable, invoice ID. Okay, we already put that in a variable. And what about B? B is going to take on, of course, a static term, which is going to be called invoice equals invoice. So in this case, we're using VBA to place that static term. In the case above, we used our data here that we mapped. Okay, so we have invoice. We can call this set static order type. The order type is always going to be invoice in this case, and that's of course column B, not A. Okay, so now columns C, let's call it C all the way through. In this case, let's call it column 2 all the way through the total. We have another. So we're going to go from 2 all the way to column 7. From 3 to 7, we need a loop, and we're going to add that data in here. So for the invoice item column is going to be equal from 3 to 7. I'm closing our loop. Next invoice item column. Okay, so once inside our invoice column, again, we're going to update that database. Order items database dot cells, again, dynamic. What's our row? Our row is our invoice item row. What's our column? It's going to be our invoice item column. Dot value, what's going to be equal based on that array. And so what is that array? It's called the row data array. In this case, our row data array is going to be equal to the invoice item column minus 3. Why are we subtracting 3 in this case? Because we're starting out on 3, right? The first value in this array is always going to be 0, right? So how do we get to 0? We know we're going to go 3, right? So we need to get 0, 1, 2, 3, and 4. So that's going to place our table data, place table data right in there. Okay, just need equals there. Okay, so row data array, right? Remember, our row data array, it's coming from here, right? We've got all that information. Oh, got to do that. All right, so let's add that. I almost missed that. Okay, so right here, our row data here is going to be equal to, we got to set that up, row data. What is our row data? Let's just add that here up here. Equals the table data array based on the invoice item. And what does that mean? And that means as we're looping through each individual row, remember we're going 0 row, 1, 2, we got 3 rows, we're going to extract that data for each row, all the information in that row into a single row of data, right? I want all that, right? All we have is the whole table data, right? But I want to extract each individual row and put it inside the row data. I want to then split this row data, right, inside an array. Row data array, okay, in this case is going to be equal to, we're splitting that again, splitting row data, comma, and then asterisk. And I'll show you exactly what that means in a minute. Okay, so we're splitting that once again. So all we've had up until this point is the information that we have inside each individual row. So now what I want to do is I want to split this row data, all of this row data right here. Here I want to split it by the asterisk. So we get 1, and then another one, right? And then another one, the quantity, and then the price, and then the total, splitting it by the asterisk. So we can then work with each individual item, and that's going to be on the row data. And that's where we're going to get this row data array, because we create this array here, and we split it up by that asterisk. So we can then individual columns. It is that we're going to separate there. So we have that. Okay, but I also want to have a conversation. What if we have a blank row? Well, then I want to run a little bit of an if statement, right? What if the data is let's say what if we have an empty row, right? If, in this case, let's check it out. Row data array. I want to check for the first available array. What is that first item? It's going to be 0, right? If it's equal to empty, then I want to go to the next file. Go to, in this case, next file. Basically, I want to skip it. When we have an empty row, there's nothing we can do. So not in that file, so we just skip that, right? That's going to be the end of the rows, right? Let's say you're mapping 10 rows, but you only have 2 rows of invoices. Once you get to the 2 rows, we're done with that file, right? We need to skip out of it. So we're going to go all the way, in this case, to the next row. So we're going to loop it. Right before the loop, we need to go exit out of that. So we can do that right here. So we'll just call this next and add to that, in this case, next file. Okay, So we're going to write more. Okay, so that's it. So we want to skip all this in case we have the blank rows. We don't need to continue. Okay, so now that we've mapped out each individual row data and split that row data based on the asterisks, we can then add each individual item inside that row from 3. Okay, so now that we've added that, but so basically all we've done at this point is we first added those 2 columns, then we added all of this from 3 to 7. Now I need to add the last 2, the order row and the row. So I want to add those last 2 in focus on column H and column I. So we're just going to copy this and we're going to update the columns on this case. So H and then I. So this one's going to be H and this one's going to be I. So now what is H going to take on? H is going to take on, we need to have that column. I need to know what column, the order row here. So we have that already, the order row here. So that's the variable it's going to take on. We just need to make sure we increment that equals the order row. And then of course, the last one is simply going to take on the item row, or in this case, we could also put in a formula. So that should be sufficient. Equals, in case we decide to delete a row, and we'll put in that formula there. So that's called the row, we'll call that row formula. Okay, so we've added that, but what we need to do is we need to increment that row. We also need to increment the item. So there's 2 things we need to increment here. I need to increment this invoice item row. I want to make sure that we do that. Increment the invoice item row. How do we know that? This invoice item row, right, as we're adding items down here, right, we're starting here. We need to increment the rows as we move down, and we also need to increment the order rows, 10, 11, 12, right? So we need to increment both of those. So that we're going to do that. So the invoice order row is going to equal the order row plus 1, increment order row, and also the invoice item row. We need to increment that. So we can copy that here, paste it down here, equals plus 1. Increment, we'll call this invoice item database row. So we're incrementing that as well. And that's it. We can go to the next item. Very good. All right, let's make it. This should be invoice item. I'm going to loop through invoice item and then invoice item, not row, right? Okay, because otherwise it's confusing. Now keep in mind, invoice item, we're looping through all of the items in there. And then this is why this invoice items work. As we move through those, right? In this case, it's going to be 0, 1, 2, right? In this case for 3 rows. So that's how we can pull up 0 is going to pull up that. I know it's a bit confusing. So as we loop, in this case 3 items, this is going to go from 0 to 1 to 2. So we're going to put all the data inside this row. We're going to then split that row based on the asterisk, and then we're going to add every individual item within that row. Okay, good. I'm glad we got that cleared up. Now we're ready to go. Okay, so now what do we want to do? Now we've brought all of the information, and we've done it for everything. So everything we need, we just need to clear out the file, just like we did before. Remember, just like we did here, we cleared out the file name as we did up here. So all we need to do is do the same thing again. So I'm just going to copy that just as we did here and then bring it down here. So all we need to do, so now once we've got the file name, it clears out the current file name. And I do want to check again, just as we did before, we can copy that mostly and just make some updates on here. So again, I'm going to copy this here. We don't need any weight in this case. And I'm going to paste it down here. We're going to make the appropriate updates. So if the invoice archive, right, in this case, we're not focused on invoice archive. We're going to be focused on the data archive. So we're going to put that data archive. I want to make sure that it's clear. In this case, it's not going to be the data file path, right, and the directory data file path. And basically what we want to do now is take that text file and bring it over to the archive, right, the archive, the data archive. I want to put it there. But if it exists there already, I certainly don't, I want to delete it. So if it exists there, clears out the current file name, then we're going to basically move the copy the data. Let's put this data file. Now we're copying the data file to the archive file. So file copy data. In this case, it's going to be called data archive. So data archive is where we're going to put it, data archive, and it's going to go to the data file path. So copy the data file path, it's going to move into the data archive. So we must copy that data, that txt file. I want to put that in the archive. That will do it. Then what we're going to do is simply delete it here, kill the data. And in this case, instead of PDF count, I want to count the data. So we're going to call this data count equals data count plus 1. Call this data because I want to know the difference, data count. So count data text files converted. All right, I want to know how many text files and looping. And lastly, what I would do is just want to provide a message box to let the user know how many were converted. Message box PDF count, right? Count and what? space. We'll do PDFs have been uploaded. How many got uploaded? Right? And let's do a space and maybe a new line. New line, right? And then we'll do another one. Let's say data count. How many data files? Data count. And then a space. Invoice data files have been, let's call this processed or uploaded or whatever you want to do that. In this case, processed, been processed, okay? Okay, good. So that's it. That's going to let us know. And just update it here and quotation here. Okay. All right, good. So we're good to go. So that's pretty much it. That's all we need to do. And we got too many ands here. Okay, we're good to go. Okay, looking good. Now we have that. We can clear out the extra spaces here we don't need. We'll take a look over our code, saving that work, of course. And looks like good. Of course, if there's any issues, we'll fix them as we speak. And we'll try it with one, and then we'll do multiple here. Okay, the next thing inside back in the command, we know that this is working now. We're good to go. What we're going to do is we're going to save any work. We're going to close this, and we want to make sure we turn it on, okay? And then run scenarios immediately, right? And then we can do that. So that's, we're just going to run it immediately and activate that. Okay, so now it's saved automatically. We're going to save it. So we can just save it, and then it's always going to be running. Now, automatically, when we add a webhook, it should go through this process. Okay, so let's take a look inside here, our data file here inside our folder, and let's take a look. Let's clear out the invoice data that we have. And I also want to clear out the invoice data on ours. Let's take a look inside our PDF invoices here, making sure there's nothing here in this folder here. Okay, good. And I also want to clear out the data here. So the order database, 11, that looks good. I want to make sure there's nothing here. Okay, so there's nothing here. Good, good, good. And let's go ahead and add in here. Now what we're going to do is we're going to simply bring a file and then run our macro. So let's take this one and put it inside our PDF invoices, pasting it here. And then, of course, inside of here, I've taken this macro here. I've already assigned it to that, and it's going to be the PDF. That's the macro we just created called PDF to Excel. So that's the one I'm going to run. I'm going to run that, and let's take a look here, main invoice data. All right, that should be the array, right? The main invoice data array. Of course, that's the array that we have. Let's continue on with this. Okay, let's take a look inside to see what's going on. Now, of course, it's going to take a few seconds to get it there, but let's take a look inside our folder here. There's our PDF. If we refresh that in about 20 or so seconds, right? So let's take a look. If you want to know what's going on, right, you can click on here. History here, right? You see it's running now, right? You see it's running 19 seconds or so. If we refresh it, gives you an idea of that it's going on. Okay, good. Now let's go ahead and take a look back inside our scenario here. Take a look inside our folder here. Refreshing this, our invoice is gone. Good, that's what I want to share. Our invoice data here is gone. Good, because it went through. Our invoice data archive here shows an archive. Good, I like that. Our invoice archive shows the one we just added. I like that there. Let's take a look inside our data here. One PDF has been uploaded. One invoice data files have been processed. Very nice. Inside our order database. Okay, here it is. 12 invoice Fred. Good. Skipping here. Skipping these two. Adding that. That looks perfect. Taking a look inside our orders. Invoice bathroom 2, 3. That looks good. Everything looks good according to that. So if I want to load invoice, all I need to do is enter 12 here, and our invoice is loaded. Perfect. All right, let's try it with the other two and see how that goes. Okay, so we did 12. Now we're going to do 13 and 14. All I'm going to do is drag them into the PDF invoices folder. I'm just going to simply run our macro and take a look. All right, and after a moment or so, 2 PDFs have been uploaded and 2 invoice data files have been processed. Looking back in our orders, we now have orders 13 and 14 here. Order items, we now have 13 and 14, 3 rows for 13, 2 rows for 14. Back in the side, loading up order number 13, loads properly. 14, we can now make changes if you want. 14 does. Fantastic. Excellent. In this training, I have shown you how you can automatically process and convert unlimited PDF invoice files into Excel to make them fully editable in just a click of a button with a single macro. It's been a great training. If you do like these trainings, please don't forget to subscribe. Also, if you like these workbooks, I've got 200 of my best workbooks available for just $77. That'll help us out. I'll include the link down below. And don't forget our Patreon, where we've got even more content. And of course, we'd like to hear back from you on your feedback. Of course, if there's any features you want or any fixes you want me to make, or maybe you want me to focus on that, I'm doing that in Patreon. So we'll see you over there. Thanks so much.